Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews of just about every indie game we can get our hands on, and today we're going to be taking a look at Goetia for the Nintendo Switch. And I honestly have absolutely no idea if I'm even saying that right, but you get what you pay for, so don't expect too much eloquence. Though, I do try. If you are unfamiliar with the story of Goetia, though, it's actually not something I can really get into too terribly deeply, because it's a point-and-click adventure where, again, the entire point of playing the game is to figure out what exactly the real story is. But besides the overly mysterious and spooky super text of the game, the situation you start out in is honestly pretty awesome as well. Because we begin the game playing as the main character, who is actually a disembodied spirit of a young girl who's been brought back to this world. Not necessarily brought back to life, vis-a-vis disembodied, but as we get even a few frames into the game, we realize we've been brought back to this reality right outside the doorstep of the old manor where we used to live. And with very little exploration, we find out it's been about 40 years since we've died. But just like any good gothic novel, there's not only spirits, ghosts, and the supernatural, but a good handful of demons. And though you will be playing the game mostly on your own as a solo experience, there is one demon in particular that is a little bit invested in your success with figuring out the mystery of how and why you were brought back. And that is about as far as I'm going to go with that. The actual gameplay, though, carries out like you would expect from a pretty typical point-and-click adventure. Though, thankfully, instead of leaving it as a raw pixel hunt, clicking everything you can imagine to see what is actually an actionable item, the developers let us push the little minus button on the controller to highlight everything that's potentially an actionable item or a meaningful detail in the game. On any item or any area that you do want to explore in the game, though, there is the typical 3-button mechanic, where you can press X to get a little bit of an exposition on whatever it is the main character is looking at, A to possibly interact with it, but Y to actually possess it. And so whether it's a screwdriver, a book, or a statue, these are going to be the actionable items in the game that you'll need to manipulate in order to push the puzzles forward. Everything else in the game is going to be heavily textual and heavily contextual and really rely on your ability as the player to put the pieces together and really problem solve. Because while as a little girl you were aware that your father had kind of a bit of proclivity toward demonology, what you realize after coming back to this world as a spirit is that your mother has taken up the mantle and really run with it. And as you read through lost notes, journals, and creepy scrawlings across attic walls, you'll be required to dig deeper and deeper into subtextual clues to put together some really mind-blowing puzzles. Moving on to the visuals of the game, though, I'd have to say Goetia is pretty brilliant. Because it's both sparse and full of so many details that you can't help but want to explore. At the same time, the more exploration you do makes you just that much more creeped out. And this paired with the absolutely desolate soundtrack of the game just makes for a really good experience. And while I have played through my share of creepy kind of pseudo-supernatural point-and-click adventures like Earthworms or Isoland, both of which I will link in the video, Goetia goes much further as an indie game point-and-click adventure and gives between 10 and possibly 20 hours of gameplay. And this is due to a fairly unique mechanic that I didn't actually mention earlier in the review. Yes, Goetia is a point-and-click adventure. Yes, there is exploration and actionable items, just like any other point-and-click adventure out there. But one of the places that Goetia really does stand out as its own unique game in the indie market is that it actually incorporates elements similar to what you'd expect from a Metroidvania. As you're solving the mystery, unlocking puzzles, and interacting with demons, in key segments of the game, your spirit form will actually be gaining new abilities and unlock new areas of previously explored partitions of the game. And this is probably one of my favorite aspects of Goetia that some players might actually really hate. And that is that this is a gigantic point-and-click adventure with a lot of puzzles and some really, sometimes obtuse ones, I'll be honest, but some really intense ones. Which means you can explore as far as you can explore with whatever abilities you have, and every actionable item will be actionable from the very beginning of the game, but you might not be able to use said item until you've progressed much further into the game. Additionally, puzzling items don't disappear, meaning that if you've used them, you're not certain if you might need to use that item again. And as there are extra puzzles in addition to the main storyline quest, You may even beat the game without having discovered the full fruition of the story. And this is why I said it might drive some gamers crazy, and gamers like me might absolutely love it. Because ever since the early days of Myst and Revan, which pretty much set the bar for point-and-click adventures, I have to be honest, they've kind of taken a downturn and become very prescriptive, very linear, and really easy to figure out. But Goetia acts more true to life. Your character that you're playing as has no idea what's going on or what any of these tools might function as, and so as the player, neither do you. But if you are a completionist and you need to be really OCD about how far you've made it in the game, thankfully in the pause menu there is actually a percentage counter to let you know how much of the game you have solved. So the developers didn't completely leave you hanging. But now jumping into some more explicit critiques of the game, there's really only a couple to mention. One is that if you aren't playing with the actual touchscreen function on the Nintendo Switch, the controls do feel a little bit sluggish. And if you're wanting to progress faster, that can get a bit frustrating. And the other point is that the game does have a couple of kind of small bugs and or glitches. Cruising through the game's menus, there were several times that I opened up a menu and instead of being able to fast track to a new room, somehow pushing the action button opened up a screen behind the screen I was looking at, and while it certainly wasn't game breaking, it was just a little weird. And on the note of superimposing menus upon menus, there is one other thing that might become a little bit frustrating. And that's the fact that pressing the B button, the cancel button in the game, cancels everything. So if you are in possession of an item and you're trying to solve the puzzle and go into a menu to look at your codex or any sort of journals you may have kept along the way, pressing the B button to exit out of the menu will also cause you to exit your possession out of that item. And while that might not make sense unless you've actually played the game, what it essentially does is cause you to drop whatever item you're trying to work with, and if you're a couple of stories up, that might be a little bit irritating to have to go back and try and retrieve that item to start the puzzle over again. But taking a step back and looking at Goetia as a whole, as a potentially 20-hour-long campaign, though it can be beaten much quicker, maybe 7 to 10 hours if you really know what you're doing, those minor frustrations they pale in comparison to the game that's actually being offered. And considering that it does, on occasion, go on a pretty deep sale of only a couple dollars, if you do manage to find it on the sale, it is a no-brainer if you're a fan of the point-and-click genre. And though it is really text-heavy, so if you're not a big reader, that's something to note. If you do engage with the reading, some of it'll give you goosebumps. It's pretty well done. And while I could totally go on about this game for a lot longer, it's about time to wrap up the review of Goetia now on the Nintendo Switch. So if you enjoyed the review, or especially if you found it helpful, feel free to throw us a comment or a like to show your support. And don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. There are new and unique indie games coming out every single day, and as I'm finding every time I go in the eShop, there's thousands of indie games out there that I'd never even heard of. So whether it's an easy hard pass or an absolutely unforgettable gem, chances are if it's on the Switch, you're gonna find out about it right here. But anyway, this has been The Budget Gamer, so as always, thanks for watching.